Cinema Podcast.
Producer's a friend of mine. Just had a teamster come and drop me off.
All right, hello and welcome back, everybody, to another great episode of the Cult Cinema Podcast. I am Gage.
I'm Ashley.
And today we are still in the 90s, taking it back a couple years compared for our previous episodes to 1996's Space Jam. Not really a cult classic, and if you look at it from cult classics being, films that didn't do well when they initially came out and then kind of found their cult following along the way. This was a very successful film when it came out. Made $27 million in its opening weekend, and I believe grossed to over $90 million with over $1 billion in sales in retail. From home video, which is insane. So it's a very successful movie, but nonetheless still kind of has a bit of a cult following in terms of like the people that still talk about and, enjoy and watch this movie today. It's definitely a movie that I grew up with as a kid. I remember, watching it at my grandmother's all the time because she had it on VHS, and I loved the Looney Tunes. I have like a whole VHS collection of all the old Looney Tunes show from the 40s that I grew up watching. I don't know about you, but I personally couldn't give less of a shit about basketball. I was more into it because of the Looney Tunes, but I was like, okay, Michael Jordan, I know that name. I know he's big into basketball. But, I absolutely love the movie. And just because you're not a sports fan doesn't necessarily mean that you can't enjoy sports movies. So, but what did you think of what are your impressions of this film? Do you have any, did you see it at all when it first came out, or have you seen this before?
96. So how old was I?
I was -5 years old.
I was 10. No, I didn't see this as a kid. I actually, when I sat down to watch this movie, I was like, oh, I've never seen this all the way through.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I haven't watched it all the way through. So this is my first time watching it all the way through.
What'd you think?
My first thought is like, who made this movie? Why was this a concept that was like, yes?
Right. We'll get into that in a little bit, but there was kind of a leading up into making this movie. It wasn't just like, somebody sitting in a room, it just light bulb dinged, and it was just like, Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny, let's do it. Let's make a feature film. There was a little bit more leading up into that idea.
Yeah.
A favorite of mine, absolutely, from the 90s, even though I wasn't, around when the movie first came out, I still enjoyed it as a kid. But yeah, so those are kind of our first impressions of the movie. We can go ahead and kind of get into the plot synopsis here for the people who haven't seen this, 20, almost 30-year-old movie, I think.
Right. I don't have a large plot synopsis. So basically, this is, like you said, it's featuring Michael Jordan. Mm-hmm. It starts out with, an actor as him as a kid, and he is playing basketball. We see scenes of him getting through the NBA, obviously getting hugely famous. I'm sure even if you haven't seen the movie, you know who Michael Jordan is. He's clearly one of the most famous people on the planet, I would say.
Most people still debate that he's the greatest of all time. Of course, people put him in the, against like LeBron James and Kobe Bryant, but most people will still argue that, he is still the best.
I'm going to stick with that theory too,
Sure.
And especially that's why they chose him for this movie. This is noted to be the first live action animated film featuring a human and the cartoons.
Yeah.
So
well, we did have
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we did have Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which came out, what I think it was like a decade earlier.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of did the same thing
movie.
with of course, Who Framed Roger Rabbit does, while being a combination of live action and animation, does have a much more darker tone to it.
Oh my God, right?
Yeah. And,
it traumatized me as a child.
It's intense.
That shoe scene, I cry every time. I'd probably still cry as an adult.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, everybody had that, every little kid had that crush on Rebecca Rabbit.
Jessica
Rabbit. Why did I think Rebecca? But
because her name should rhyme.
Yeah. But yeah, Space Jam was still kind of a technical marvel in the sense that it was the first time that something like this was done digitally in terms of like digital visual effects, where Who Framed Roger Rabbit was all done on film. Where this was like their chance to kind of see if they could kind of do it the same way digitally.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool that not only did they use obviously a giant green screen and Michael Jordan's, using these, they called them actors, but they went on their knees, so he was like eyeline.
Yeah,
with
they used the
what
combination
would be the
of
cartoons.
Yeah, actors in green screen suits.
Yeah.
And a
That
couple.
was
They did
probably
use puppets
crazy.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish maybe you found something, but I wish there was something online, like a behind the scenes video that you could see how that worked.
Oh, there
Just
are.
back
there's,
then.
Yeah,
There
there's
is?
plenty of behind the scenes footage and pictures of Michael Jordan just on a green screen set, with just a
I
bunch of
didn't see
guys in
it.
green suits dancing around him and stuff.
Oh, cool.
It's pretty funny. But it was actually that was one of the reasons why he didn't want to do the sequel, because he was not a fan of working in an entire like green screen set.
No.
But I have
Well,
more
and-
into that I'll get into later. But that's
Michael Jordan's not an actor.
right. Yeah, and it's clear watching this movie that he is not
Yeah.
an actor. I have in my notes that basketball players cannot act.
No.
Other than if you look at who's the basketball player from Uncut Gems? Kevin.
I don't know.
Garrett,
Kevin Durant?
no, Kevin. It's
I don't
Kevin
know.
something. I don't know. The name I'll put right here. That's the name.
There you
For
go.
the video- for the
Ding.
video viewers. There's the name.
Well,
his
and
his portrayal
you
in
think
Uncut Gems
about-
is pretty good, but
if you think about how basketball players are today versus how they were in the 90s, you have to be on camera. My husband was telling me, because he's a huge sports fan of every sport, you have to make press time. It's in
Yeah.
your contracts. You're supposed to be doing it. And they have press people that teach you how to speak and teach you how to answer questions. And
yeah.
so I would say nowadays, I haven't seen the new Space Jam. I'm not going to. Don't come for me.
Don't.
But
It's-
I'm sure LeBron James did a much better job acting than Michael Jordan did.
I wouldn't say that. As someone who has seen
Okay.
most
I don't
of the second Space Jam, I think LeBron can have his Sprite commercials, and we can just leave it at that. I don't.
Well,
think
that's what they thought Jordan was going to do. Like,
Yeah.
hey, he does with these commercials. He's fine.
Nothing against LeBron James. It's just some people have it and some people don't. That's I'm
It's
just gonna
fine.
leave it at that.
Quit putting sports people in movies.
Yeah.
Leave them alone. So, yeah, I mean, the plot's pretty basic, too. I mean, Jordan gets kidnapped, gets sucked into, like, Looney Tune land. Plays the basketball. It's not a very in-depth film. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty straightforward as far as, like, what happens.
Yeah.
They're playing against an alien race that wants to take the Looney Tunes to... What's that mountain called?
Moron Mountain is the name of their home planet / amusement park, where they want to basically have the they're losing they're like losing their audience a little bit, so they want to bring in the Looney Tunes to kind of help bring more people in, but they're doing it in a very hostile manner.
Yeah, so they steal the talent of
Yeah.
some other famous NBA players that are in the film. Charles Barkley.
That's the only one I know. I don't even remember the names of everybody else. That's how much I know about basketball
Yeah.
and the players.
I think I'm going to say his first name wrong, but Irving, I want to say, is his last name. Anyway, a bunch of famous 90s basketball players. And so they turn into like really amazing basketball players, and they decide to play this game against the Looney Tunes to basically take them to this mountain and be subjected to all kinds of things up there. And Jordan, of course, plays for the Looney Tunes. There's some cute scenes back and forth with, the different characters. Obviously, Daffy Duck and Tasmanian Devil. They all have their own, like, thing they do based on the fact that they've been a cartoon since the 30s. So, I mean, that's pretty instilled in people's brains. And then, of course, there's Lola Bunny, who's the only girl really mentioned in this movie. And wasn't there like a whole thing with the new one where she had boobs and people like flip the fuck out?
I don't know knowing people on the internet and Lola Bunny, I could only imagine that the only complaint that they would have is that they might not have been big enough, as weird as that sounds.
No, it was
But
the opposite, I think. I think
Yeah.
people were like, this is a kid's movie. Why are her breasts, like, she had cleavage? And I'm like, because she's a woman? I don't know.
I don't know. There's like a lot of stuff with just people over the past years just constantly sexualizing Lola Bunny.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's just odd is all
It
I
is
can
odd.
say. But yeah. What I do love about they raise the stakes a little bit at the end, where it's basically, Jordan is like, all right, if we win, you got to give all my friends their talent back, and if you guys win, then you get me. And I love how the whole thing is just like, he's willing to risk his life for all these cartoon characters that he just met a couple hours ago, knowing that he has a whole wife and kids at home that he needs to get back to, and like his whole other sports career and everything. But
I mean, it shows you it's supposed to be like the confidence building portion. Like,
Yeah.
I'm this great, so you're this great. And they kind of play on that with the special juice that Bugs, I mean, it's water, but he puts Michael's special juice on it. And, it's supposed to teach kids that you're great inside no matter what. So I get it. I get the point. But yeah, it's when you think about it and look back on it as an adult, you're like, this just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of like really interesting stuff. Of course, we do get Bill Murray, who makes a couple appearances in this film.
Honestly, my favorite part.
Yeah,
His
I watched
lines
it with
in this movie.
I watched it with my buddy Sam. It was one of his first time. It was one of those things where he hadn't seen it probably in a good 15 years or so. Because there's a beginning right before Michael gets kidnapped and taken into Looney Land. That he's playing golf with Larry Bird and Bill Murray, and that golf scene was the only time that Bill Murray is supposed to be in the movie, just kind of as a subtle cameo. Because he didn't want to be on green screen at all. He wasn't like into the whole idea, as many others were at the time, and not having something to really physically interact with. But once he saw that there were actors in green screen suits and puppets that Michael was actually interacting with, then Murray kind of came around to the idea of being in it more. But that's also because he wasn't really planned to be in so much of the film, why it's so sudden when he shows up at the game just out of nowhere, which I do love. And my buddy Sam found it hilarious because it's literally he just pops out of nowhere and he's just like, all right, I'm here in the rest of this movie now.
Yeah, it's funny. My favorite line is when they're
so like, how did you show up in here?
No, when he gets sucked into the hole and they're like standing around like, what happened basically. But then him and Larry Bird go back to the golf cart and he's like, I don't know, Larry, I'm going to put us down for 2 on that one because we're just stressed out. And I'm like, this is so flippant, but also Bill Murray, you're perfect.
I love how I think it's Daffy Duck at the game is asking like, "How did you get here?" And then his response is, "Well, I'm a friend of the producer, and one of the guys just came and picked me up." So a little there's a bit of fourth wall breaking here and there in the film, even with the live action characters. But I would assume that the producer he's probably referring to is Ivan Reitman, who was the executive producer on this film and worked with Murray on a bunch of other projects, including Ghostbusters and Stripes.
Okay.
So,
I'm sure that's him then.
Yeah. But I would definitely say that Murray is probably one of my favorite. I mean, I would say that there's a good amount of jokes that still hold up. There's, there's definitely some jokes here and there that I did not pick up on as a kid. One there's talking about, it's the scene in particular where Daffy and Bugs are going into Michael Jordan's house to get all of his stuff. So there was no dialogue originally written for that scene. So all of that is just improv back and forth between the two voice actors, which are, who is it? I know it's...
I did not write down the voice actors' names. There are just so many.
Yeah, but the two in particular, one that is Bugs Bunny.
I think it's cute. They pull in the actual kids, too.
Yeah.
That's cute.
But yeah, that most of that scene did not originally have dialogue, but D. Bradley Baker, who is the voice of Daffy, who is also known for, doing voices on American Dad, Phineas and Ferb, Steven Universe, a bunch of other stuff, and Billy West, who did Bugs Bunny, who's also famous for doing stuff on Futurama and Ren and Stimpy. It was kind of them having a bit of a just improv back and forth, and there's a line where Bugs mentions, like, all those mugs and lunchboxes and clothing that have all of our faces on it? Do you ever get a cut of that? And Daffy's like, nope.
I totally missed that.
Yeah.
That's funny.
There was another one that was it's when all the basketball players get their talents taken away and they're all going through like therapy, and one of the therapists asked one of them, like, do you seem to struggle to perform in tasks outside of the basketball court? But yeah, just like little stuff like that you wouldn't really understand as a 5-year-old kid watching this movie.
Yeah, I think the things that are really played up for the children are like when the monsters get de-pantsed and when the skunk's there, Pepe Le Pew's got his thing, and yeah.
But I do appreciate it, like what is essentially a kid's movie, throwing in a few jokes here and there that the parents can enjoy. I think that's, when you go to take your kid to go see a movie like this, you want to be able to get a little bit out of it as well.
I did read that was mainly in competition with Disney, because at that point Disney had made I don't know how many umpteen movies. Yeah. And they're all animated, and there's always little gems in there for adults.
Yeah. Especially with like the Marvel universe, because it kind of has, a little bit more of a mature audience. I wouldn't say that it did. If you look at some of the more modern Marvel films, that they're really made for kids. I would say probably like
teenagers,
preteens,
young adults,
teenagers, young adults kind of thing. Yeah.
But kids can still watch them.
Absolutely. There's, of course, a lot going into, what eventually became of this movie. So, of course, are we kind of like, is there any more on the plot synopsis that we want to go over before I kind of get into like the pre-production stuff?
Basically, the Looney Tunes win. They bring Jordan back on a spaceship, which, by the way, everyone acts like is fucking normal. Yeah. And he lands in this baseball field and decides that he's not good at baseball, even though everyone's telling him he's not good at baseball. And I asked my husband, I'm like, was he really bad at baseball? And he's like, yeah, he was really actually bad at baseball.
Well, yeah, because he only played
so he
for
went
like
right back to basketball.
2 seasons. Yeah, he played from 93 to 95. But apparently there's the scene when he's playing baseball where the catcher is giving him like
direction.
Yeah. Apparently that's based on a real story of there was a time where Jordan was in a game where the catcher was actually giving him like call outs and everything. But the movie kind of plays this off as like, oh, it's just Jordan kind of ignoring the advice, either because he doesn't want to win based off of technically cheating, or if it's just he doesn't believe the catcher. Either way, that's kind of how you can interpret it from the movie. But the way, from the research that I did, it was the catcher giving him instruction and Jordan just being such a bad baseball player that he was still just not able to hit the ball.
Yeah. Yep, that happens, and the Looney Tunes win, and the monster goes back to the planet that he came from. And before the aliens turned into big giant aliens, because they took the talent, they were like these little teeny tiny aliens. They were actually kind of cute for being animated, and they turned back to them and just want to stay up to Looney Tunes.
I do love how Danny DeVito is like the boss, is the voice of the boss of like the main villains and everything, which apparently they were going to get Dennis Hopper to play like a live action villain of that character, which I think it's good that they brought in DeVito and made the character actually animated, though.
I could have gone either way with that, I guess.
Yeah. But I just, I love me some Danny DeVito. Can't lie.
Yeah. He's a good dude.
But yeah, so kind of going into how this movie got made. So back in the early 90s, Jordan had actually worked with Spike Lee to do a series of commercials to promote the new Air Jordan, series of sneakers that he was putting out. And in that commercial, it featured a character from one of Spike Lee's films. I believe it was Mars Blackman from the film She's Gotta Have It. Can't say I'm familiar with that film in particular. But with it's a highly praised commercial in the world of marketing. And the producers at Nike were trying to think of other fictional characters that they could pair with Jordan to kind of write off the success of that. And eventually they teamed up with Warner Brothers to do a series of commercials titled the Hair Jordan Campaign, which was a combination of, just a collection of commercials. I think there was only one or two that actually, of just Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny kind of just playing basketball and doing goofy pranks and stuff on the court and stuff like that.
Yeah, I barely remember that either.
Yeah. And this is like kind of, they must have been like right before Jordan retired, because I think like this movie kind of got conceptualized around 93, which is around the time that Jordan had initially retired from basketball, because this movie was like kind of canceled for a little bit because he was retiring.
Right.
But Jordan's timeline of like when he was actually a basketball player, so I don't know when he started, but his initial retirement was in 93, played baseball for 2 years, came back to the sport of basketball in 95, then retired again in 1999, came back briefly in 2001 with all of his earnings going to help fund victims of 9/11, which had just happened, a few days before he had announced that he was coming back, and then eventually retired for the last time in 2003.
Well, he started in, obviously, a very young age.
Yeah. I think
but he played at the University of North Carolina.
Yep.
So if you want to call that his start, like professional career.
Right.
I guess.
But yeah, eventually, they brought on, or actually, I guess kind of brought on, it was, so the film is directed, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, Joe Pytka.
Yeah.
Is the director, but he also was the one that directed those commercials as well, so they kind of just brought him on. And it was actually Pytka that kind of is responsible for the more modern interpretation of Looney Tunes that we see in both these commercials and the film, because prior to, we still kind of had the kind of older 40s design and not politically correct version of Bugs Bunny, because if you look at some of those old cartoons, some of them are very brutal in both the cartoon violence and the language and symbolism that they use for a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of, cartoon production houses were doing the same. There's, Disney was notorious for having really kind of racy stuff back in the 40s and World War II area and stuff like that. But
yeah, Betty Boop.
Yeah.
I have a, oh wait, she's not up there. I was like, I have a Betty Boop. My grandma Wetmore, who's been long dead, but that's what we'd do Sundays. We'd watch church in the morning and then Betty Boop in the afternoon. Black and white.
Yep. But yeah, they eventually got, Pytka on board to direct the film. It was one of those things where they actually didn't bring him on until a while after the pre-production process had started. Like, they were already like animating stuff before they even brought Pytka on to direct the live action. And Pytka was more responsible for directing the live action stuff anyway, and most of the directing of the actual like animation, everything was more led to the producers and visual effects supervisors and stuff like that.
Did you also have that they had like over 700 animators?
I did see that it was like spread out across like somewhere between 12 and 18 different production houses working on all this thing at the same time. One
in Ohio.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you know the name of it by chance?
No.
Probably not around
anymore. London, Canada, California, and Ohio are just some of the studio locations. Yeah, over 18 studios, 700 workers. Just a huge scale, obviously, for this type of thing.
But yeah, and like I was saying, Pytka kind of reimagined the look and feel of Bugs Bunny, and that's kind of, if you look at this film and the more newer Looney Tunes cartoons that have come out over the past few years, you can tell that they've definitely taken inspiration from Pytka's character, which is a modern interpretation. That's of course what you would probably rather go with than the weird stuff that was going on in the 40s. As much as I love that series.
Well, even the look of Bugs Bunny is different in this film.
Yeah, his old design is very much kind of just like an egg, like a sideways egg with ears, and this is like a lot more, the cheeks are a little bit fuller, and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so it was a 6-week shoot. Once they started principal photography, And because Michael was about to go start the, a new NBA season, Warner Brothers did essentially put together like a gym that he could work out at in his downtime. But because he was coming off of losing the previous championship when he was still playing, he was really working his ass off at the gym when they weren't shooting. His schedule was wake up, shoot, then, work out, shoot to finish off the day, and work out again. And he was working out and going to the gym and practicing so often that he was not really involved with any of like the production meetings or anything like that. He was pretty much just there as like an on-call actor, which
cares?
makes sense. Yeah, because I mean he's a basketball player first, and it seems like this was very much more of a side project for him.
Yeah.
Because most people will tell you that this movie is essentially just a giant advertisement for Jordan and Warner Brothers. And it definitely is. I don't think it's nearly as bad as the newest one, where the newest one is literally just Warner Brothers trying to show off their giant corporate penis and just like, look at all the properties that we own.
God.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of like advertising mixed in? Like, is there some, like Sprite cans or basketball logos? I don't know.
So you see Jordan eating McDonald's, and he's, Jordan has worked with McDonald's a lot in the past. There's that infamous commercial that he did in promotion with McDonald's where he's like, "Stop it, get some help." I'll have to see if I can pull up the clip, but yeah, I thought that was funny.
I didn't notice it too much in this Space Jam. That's why I was wondering if in the new Space Jam,
I don't remember there being. Granted, I watched maybe half the movie and had to turn it off because it was just so lame. But I don't remember there being a lot of like product placement, but I remember there being a lot of like, not necessarily advertising, but just them kind of showing, like there's a section where he's going through the portal and you just see all of the different Warner Brothers properties that they own and stuff like that. And it's kind of just like constantly referencing Warner Brothers and the stuff that they own. And
okay.
Because the villain of Space Jam 2 is like an algorithm that is in Warner Brothers' like system or something like that. And they like mention this, so yeah. But yeah, they eventually, to get back to the production process, so they finished the shoot within about 6 weeks, and then the animators had roughly 10 months to finish what animations that they had yet to draw and to composite everything. And for those that are somewhat familiar with, animation and compositing, so basically the way that they had roughly 70 different layers, whether that's, the animation plus the live action footage plus whatever assets they were putting on. There were roughly 70 per composite shot, and there were over 1,000 different composite shots, meaning like basically 1,000 different VFX shots that they had to do over the course of this time.
Jesus.
And it was like serious crunch time for these guys. And this is, like you said, like 700 different animators, 18 different studios. Because even though, it's
so massive.
Yeah. Because even though the process is, you would think it's being sped up because now that they have computer technology, a lot of this is still very new, and to a lot of people being able to, because, CGI is still kind of new, even though it kind of has been around since the late 80s. It really didn't get adapted, I would say, until like maybe mid to late 90s. Well,
like, not for an entire
cinema.
Film.
Yeah.
You see CGI in like RoboCop or...
Right, but this
Terminator.
Is like 90% of this movie is animated.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, plus it's like working with old janky computers of the time. Of course, they had their systems crash several times, having to redo a ton of work.
Sure. Can you imagine the floppy disks everywhere?
Just spread all across the table.
A tree of floppy disks.
Yeah. But yeah, but in the end, they got the movie done. They did actually do a website for this film, which was still kind of new at the time. The vice president of marketing, I think it was, I know his last name is Buckley, but anyway, he was kind of the one that went to Warner Brothers and was like the kind of guy that was like, once the whole internet thing started to become popular. That's such a boomer thing for me to say. The whole internet thing that just happened.
It's still there.
Yeah, the website is still there. So basically, it was posted. It didn't get a ton of traction because, internet was still new. Eventually, I believe it was somebody on Reddit managed to come across the website again in 2010. And the website, then began to get a little bit more traction, 14 years later. But because the website was no longer monetized, Warner Brothers shut it down as soon as they started seeing people flock to it. But apparently some of the developers that previously worked on the site were still working at Warner Brothers and kind of pleaded for them to keep the website up. So if you go to spacejam.com now, it'll just show you the trailer for the newest movie and give you stuff on that. But if you do spacejam.com/1996/, it will take you to the original website.
It still looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely got that, 90s Windows 8 style aesthetic, or Windows 98. But yeah, I mean, it included, character biography information and production notes, behind the scenes stuff. There was you could listen to the whole soundtrack on there, I believe. You could get desktop wallpapers.
Soundtrack.
Anybody? Desktop wallpapers.
Oh.
And stuff like that. But yeah.
So we got to mention the soundtrack too, I suppose.
Yes.
Since it was a 6-time fucking multi-platinum soundtrack.
Oh yeah. Was Fly Like an Eagle made for this movie?
No, so this is a reboot in this
Okay.
movie. Seal did it originally. This is a different artist. But Jordan picked a lot of these songs. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a stellar soundtrack, to say the least, even if it does include, some artists, R. Kelly,
that we shouldn't mention.
Right.
/ you shouldn't be making money.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
anyway.
yeah, it's obviously a banging soundtrack.
Banging
People
soundtrack.
loved it.
Absolutely.
Of course, the Space Jam theme song.
What
Every
a bop.
kid had that. Right. Every kid had that song.
Yeah, it is so good. So I know this, that's kind of the, the whole process, here's the plot and the making of this film. I know it's kind of short, but do you have any other things that you want to add before we jump into just giving off some fun facts, some additional fun facts that we found?
I think I mentioned all this stuff in the plot that I was going to really talk about. Obviously, we kind of talked about the merchandise. I do kind of want to touch on that a little bit because I didn't know that the original Looney Tunes was a DC comic book.
Wait,
DC
really?
Was yes, DC was the first one to put out Looney Tunes in 1931 in a comic book.
Huh.
And Warner Brothers, it wasn't Warner Brothers back then. I actually thought I had the name of the studio, but I didn't write it down. That's weird.
It was still Warner something, wasn't it, though?
Yeah, Warner Classic or Warner, I don't remember.
Time Warner. Or
something.
Yeah.
They picked up the cartoon very quickly, but yeah, 1931, DC comic book. They don't own any of the rights to anything, obviously, now.
Yeah.
But I thought that was random factoid.
Yeah.
But no, I just have fun facts, really.
All right. Well,
Not
I
a
guess
lot either.
I've got a couple more, but if you want to go ahead and get started on yours and then go from there.
Okay. You mentioned the thing about the gym. Because he was playing with the Bulls, and I don't know if you weren't around, obviously, but the Chicago Bulls was the team. Everybody loved the Bulls, no matter where you came from. Obviously, if you were from Chicago, you liked them more, but obviously a lot of that had to do with Jordan being on the team. But yeah, that gym they built was pretty awesome, I guess. Yeah. We also talked about the actors that stood in for the size and height for the actual cartoons. The gym where the Toon Squad practices, so the Looney Tunes, is called Schlesinger Gym, which is a nod to Leon Schlesinger, who did found the original studio that ultimately became Warner Brothers Cartoons. And he was the one that produced the earliest Looney Tunes stuff. So
very cool.
Very cool nod to him. You kind of mentioned the thing about the characters looking different. I read that it's because of their movement of animation that they had to make in this movie versus the old-fashioned Looney Tunes cartoons themselves. You mainly had a cartoon character facing you, maybe turning to the side, but they weren't really moving a lot as far as that went. So yeah, the animation for this movie obviously is very fast paced. They're playing a sport, things like that. A lot of artists employed 3D models to help them kind of visualize how those movements would look and how they could do that quicker to save time on that animation.
One thing that I saw that they did also is that, at least I know that they did this mostly for reference, but they would have like a base illustration of the character, which is just kind of a flat look. And then there was kind of like a layer that kind of showed the shadows and then the highlights. And they would kind of use that as reference. Because if you look at this movie, I think it's the shadows and the highlights that they add on the characters really stand out. Sometimes it doesn't always kind of match up with the studio lighting that they're used to light the live action things. But, it's, janky's 90s CGI. What are you going to do?
Well, they also talked about how, like, a really good example is their color overlay, too. So, like, the Tasmanian devil is very brown. Well, he can't look super brown against, like, bleachers because that, like, would, cancel out that shape and size of the cartoon character in the forefront versus the background of the bleachers. So the animators, I'm sure I'd love to see like a whole documentary about just them and all the work they had to do, and that's, I'm sure, fascinating.
Actually, a lot of the information that I got for this episode actually came from a video that was done by, I can't remember the name, but the video, it's called Everything You Could Ever Know About Space Jam 1996. And it's basically a half-hour video that kind of talks about, the whole making of this movie. And it's kind of insane.
I bet.
But, oops, there, I just played it a little bit, but Night Gaze, that is the channel. A very underrated channel. It only has like 500 subscribers. The video itself only has like 240 views, but it's probably one of the best videos I've seen kind of going through the whole, making of a movie. It's very
cool.
The documentation of it is really good.
Cool.
But yeah, so definitely I would recommend people check that out after listening to this episode. After. I said after.
Don't pause and come back,
yeah.
just after. The Monstars actually had names. They aren't named in the movie, but the animators had to put, and the art team had to put names to them to like refer to them. So I thought that was cool that they actually had to name them. I can say the names if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
So the orange one is Pound. The
Okay.
green one is Bang. They're all dumb, but still. Magenta is Newt. Purple is Bupkis, and the blue one is Blanco because he's stupid.
Nice.
And then finally, my last one. So there's a Funny or Die skit that they do a table read of this movie, and it features Blake Griffith plays Michael Jordan, who of course is a famous NBA, basketball player now. He said in his pre-show interview that he had a Space Jam themed birthday when he was little, so this was like an easy yes for him when they were asking him to do it. But it also features Ben Schwartz from Parks and Rec.
Oh, yeah.
Gerard Carmichael, Danielle Fishel from Boy Meets World, Nick Kroll, Paul Scheer, Seth Green, and everyone fucking kills this. It's hilarious. I only watched like the highlighted clip version on Funny or Die, but the entire video is fucking gold. You have to go watch it.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
It's so funny.
I was like, in doing other research, like in the making of this movie, I found that there's like a good chunk of stuff, and I think one of them was like for promotional material or like a featurette of the movie. But it's also mentioned in like The Last Dance, which is the documentary on Michael Jordan. When they, in these two in particular, when they talk about the movie, they talk about it as if it was like as Bugs Bunny is a real person, and specifically in The Last Dance, they talk it in the way like as if this actually happened in real life. Like they're kind of dramatizing it and everything.
Well, Seth Green, who plays Bugs Bunny, shows up with a Bugs Bunny hat with like full-blown ears, like a bunny hat. And he does the voice of Bugs Bunny in like a slow arm. He's like, "Hey girl, what's up?" And that's how he talks in Bugs Bunny the whole time, it's just fucking hilarious. The whole thing is so funny.
Real sleazy Bugs Bunny, more sleazy than he already is.
Yeah, like literally, like he sounds the way he described it, which is going to sound terrible, he's an urban Bugs Bunny.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I was like, ugh. But it's hilarious because obviously we know how Bugs Bunny sounds in general. Right. So every time Seth Green's lines come up, even in the small clip, he's just like, yeah, does he talk like this? And he's just like, it's just fucking so funny. That's all I had for fun facts, really. There's not a ton, you know, like you said, there's clearly some behind the scenes stuff out there, so you could definitely check that out if you're a fan of the movie.
Absolutely.
Things like that. In the Funny or Die sketch, I mean, I can't hype it up enough. It's just gold.
I have a couple other things here. So Robert Zemeckis, who worked on, I think he directed Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But Joe Pytka had reached out to him to kind of get some advice going into this project, and Zemeckis told him, and I quote, "Don't do it. It nearly killed me."
I bet. Yeah.
Which I can only imagine. I mean, if Space Jam. That sounds like I'm like throwing shade at Space Jam and calling it Space Junk. That's not my intention. But no, Space Jam. Even though I can see how, you know, watching the 30-minute video that Nightgaze did, you know, talking about how much of a fucking nightmare it was working on the post-production for this movie, you know, doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit where you don't have the ability to, you know, have computer assistance or anything like that, and doing it all by hand on film and everything like that, I can only imagine would be even a more terrifying experience.
So how hard is that to do? I mean, nowadays, I guess it's not so hard to do animation, but, like... Yeah. How hard would that have been? Pretty hard.
Like, to do it on film? Or do it digitally?
Yeah. So what's the difference between shooting a movie like this? Obviously, the scale we'll take that out of the equation. But these are cartoons. So how are they shot versus a movie, I guess, is my question.
So it's mostly... You shoot all the live action stuff. Of course, you have like storyboards, or you have an idea of how everything is going to play out, or something for reference. The way that they did it for Space Jam in particular is they had a photographer on set that would take photos of like Jordan interacting with the people in the green screen suit. Those photos would then get handed off to an artist that would draw the monster over top of the person in the green screen suit, and that's essentially how they did like storyboarding. So that way, that would then get passed on to the animators, and that's what they used for reference in terms of kind of like where they should be and what they should look like in this particular scenario. A lot of what they had to do, because there's a lot of moving shots shot on the green screen, the artists would have to go frame by frame to kind of manually track in their animations of the characters and everything. And when you do it on film, you have like, you know, you have your normal, it's kind of similar to how they did it in this case. You shoot everything that's in live action and then put all the animated stuff over top of it. And that's kind of how they do it digitally. But nowadays it would be a lot easier because we have like computer assisted, like camera tracking and everything stuff like that. Yeah. You don't have to worry as much, you know, with doing hand-drawn animation over top of live action. You know, you're not going to run into the same like rendering troubles unless it's because it's mostly 2D. If you're doing some 3D stuff, then, you know, depending on, you know, what computer you have would be able to run it. But back in the late 90s, the computer that they were using to render all of their projects and everything was essentially it was a little bit more powerful, but a lot of the specs were akin to what you would find in the average like home, probably in like the early 2000s. But yeah, it's a lot of just you film the live action stuff first, you have someone kind of give a concept to the animators, and they just animate on top of it.
Okay. I don't know enough about, obviously, production to understand whatever it takes, but just wondering, like, you know, it is a cartoon. You've been shooting that for, you know, decades.
Yeah, the other one is that, so as we know, Wayne Knight plays the character of Stan, who is kind of like the guy that is helping Michael Jordan throughout the whole process, and is kind of like his really annoying assistant.
He's the cliche 90s. He's in everything, though. He's in the 90s, like,
'90s fat nerd archetype.
Fat nerdy
Yeah.
guy who's either an assistant or a buddy's friend. I mean, he's just he's that character for sure.
Yeah. But apparently that role was they had considered both Chevy Chase and Michael J. Fox for the role. I think Michael J. Fox would have been a solid pick. I think Chevy Chase, I don't think he could have. If they were going for someone that has the same personality as Stan and Wayne Knight's portrayal of it, like I said, I think Michael J. Fox, if you look at his kind of, for the lack of a better term, wacky performance in Back to the Future, I think Chevy Chase would not have been a good fit. One, because he's tall. Two, it's just Chevy Chase has a much more kind of calm, deadpan humor to him that I just don't think
Michael J.
would
Fox
fit.
too, though, at that point, wouldn't he have been a little old? And his behavior isn't really like that the older he gets in his movies.
I guess so, yeah. But I mean, I think Wayne Knight in this role is perfect. Of course, he was coming off of his fame in Seinfeld as Newman, so and Jurassic Park had just come out a couple years prior too.
Oh, that's right. We're gonna watch Michael J. Fox '90s film.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's on the list, and once you see how he acts then versus Back to the Future, you'll be like, yeah, okay, this is.
I don't think I've seen any Michael J. Fox movie that is not a Back to the Future film.
This
I haven't
one's
seen
a
Teen
gem.
Wolf. I haven't seen.
I've seen Teen Wolf. That one's weird.
Yeah.
But this is it's also a horror movie. It's called The Frighteners. It's a extreme cult classic.
Okay.
People either love or hate it, for real. I love it personally. I think it's amazing.
Gotcha.
A lot of weird animation in that one too. That
Yeah.
I think you'll appreciate. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, early animation as well.
Nice. Last little thing that I have here. So, after the success of this movie, everybody was, wanting to do a sequel, but of course Michael Jordan wasn't really on board with being, in front of a green screen again for another 6 weeks, just, doing that whole thing.
Yeah, he was like hard pass.
But there were still, some things that were being done to try to get the ball rolling on a sequel. They had started some storyboards, bringing on Bob Camp, who is well known for his work on Ren and Stimpy and SpongeBob. He started off doing some storyboards, but once he was, informed that there was actually a lie, that he was told that Jordan, because they was told that Jordan was on board for the project, and that's why he came on. But once he found, but that's when he found out, then he, he called it quits. One of the storyboards or character designs that Camp came up with was, for the sequel, was a character called Berserko that was going to be voiced by Mel Brooks. And I think that would have been pretty good. And there's a sketch of the character that is because he was very much going for a character that looked a lot like Mel Brooks, and it kind of does resemble him a little bit in the images.
Oh, okay.
There were a couple other concepts that were thrown around for a Space Jam feature. One was like kind of there was no like title for the for this one, I don't think, but it was one starring Tiger Woods. There was going to potentially be Skate Jam with Tony Hawk and Race Jam with Jeff Gordon, which I believe is a NASCAR, or I don't know. I know
he was a NASCAR.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Spy Jam with Jackie Chan. But
all terrible ideas.
Yeah. But of course, it was I think officially confirmed in 2014 that a sequel was going to be in the making, and I remember hearing about it when hearing rumors that it was going to be LeBron James in the Space Jam sequel, which did make sense to me because he was very much, he is still a big basketball player, but he was kind of like, this was at the time where people were highly comparing him to Michael Jordan.
Exactly. He's most compared for sure.
But yeah, and then the sequel got released last year, and it is total fucking dog shit, just to put it lightly. Yeah.
I've heard it's
I couldn't even
bad.
finish it. It was so bad.
My young nieces and nephews like it, but they're, under 5.
Well, that explains it. Kids will watch anything as long as it's got bright colors.
And LeBron James.
James. Yeah.
My one nephew plays basketball, so he's like, it's LeBron James. I'll do whatever he tells me to.
While he's drinking his Sprite cranberry.
He's
That was-
diabetic, so my,
Oh,
my
it's
nephew
it's
can't
Diet
even
Sprite
have
cranberry.
Sprite. Yeah. Yep. But he'll
All
drink
right.
it.
Nice. Well, I know it's a little bit of a shorter one, but I think that's going to be about it for this episode of the Cult Cinema Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As you can tell, we're kind of changing it up a little bit in terms of like not going super in depth with the scene by scene, trying to turn it a little bit more into a conversation. Because, we want this to be in addition to the film, not necessarily a replacement for the film. And that's kind of what we felt like was happening before, is that going through it scene by scene, detail by detail, it kind of, is at that point, you're just kind of like, well, I know everything that happens.
I don't need to watch the movie.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But we are thinking about, new ways that we can improve the show, for lack of a better term. So if you have any suggestions on things that we could do to make the show a little bit more entertaining for you guys, feel free to leave them in the comments below if you're on YouTube, or in the review if you're on Apple Podcasts, or send us a DM on Instagram. There's plenty of different ways to reach out to us. Of course, you can, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching the video version. For some reason, the video or episodes in general haven't been showing on Spotify. I don't know what's going on there, because I've been uploading them as video files because supposedly Spotify supports videos, but they're not popping up on there. So I'm currently trying to work with support to figure out what the hell is going on there. But last time I checked, they haven't really responded, but we're trying to get it fixed.
Yeah. We'll just probably stick to audio on that platform. So.
Yeah. If it's not on
can still
Spotify,
subscribe.
if you can't find those episodes on Spotify, they're on plenty of other different platforms.
Yeah.
But yeah, so do we know what we're doing for the next episode? I think
We do.
We're doing we're gonna do like a kids movie
My
that you
kids
picked, right?
movie.
What are we doing?
So we're gonna do the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, also from
Yes!
the 90s.
Yes.
It's
Oh
a
my
good
God,
one.
I am so hyped.
I'm really excited to like deep dive into how this was made.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's costume and puppetry, but
Yeah.
still.
I went
I'm
back
sure
and
it's
watched it about a
interesting.
year ago, and I think a lot of people think it's real campy and cheesy, which it is, but I love it.
is.
I mean, I'd rather go back and watch those than the Michael Bay Ninja Turtle movies 100%.
It's so camp. I love it.
Yeah, but that's perfect.
So
All
yeah,
right.
tune in for that.
Absolutely. Thank you again, everybody, for watching, and we will see you in the next one.